You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly know you don't belong? That's exactly what hit me the moment I stepped through the mahogany doors of my daughter's baby shower. The scent of expensive perfume and fresh lilies filled the air, but underneath it all, I could smell something else. Judgment. I stood there for a moment, clutching my carefully wrapped gift, watching as perfectly manicured women in designer dresses glided across the marble floor of what I could only describe as a mansion. This wasn't my daughter's house. This was her mother-in-law's estate, and every crystal chandelier, every imported Italian tile seemed to whisper the same message. You don't belong here, Lucia. My name is Lucia, and I'm 66 years old. I've worked as a seamstress for 43 years. My hands are permanently stained with fabric dye, and my back aches from hunching over sewing machines in poorly lit factories. But I raised my daughter, Carolina, with these same hands. I fed her, clothed her, and loved her when her father decided that responsibility wasn't for him. Mom! Carolina's voice cut through the ambient chatter, but when I turned toward her, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Her smile was different, strained, like she was forcing herself to be happy to see me. She was radiant in her flowing maternity dress, 7 months pregnant and glowing like I'd always dreamed she would be, but her eyes kept darting nervously between me and the other guest. You made it, she said, approaching me with quick, small steps. Her hug was brief, almost perfunctory. I was worried about the traffic from your neighborhood. My neighborhood. The way she said it stung more than I expected. It wasn't said with love or nostalgia. It was said with embarrassment, as if the small house where she'd learned to walk, where I'd bandaged her scraped knees, where we'd shared countless meals at a wobbly kitchen table, was something to be ashamed of. Of course I made it, minha filha, I replied, using the Portuguese endearment that used to make her smile. Now it seemed to make her wince slightly. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Before she could respond, a woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a Chanel suit approached us. This had to be Margaret, Carolina's mother-in-law. I'd heard about her through Carolina's story. Wealthy, influential, used to getting her way. She looked exactly as I'd imagined. Elegant, intimidating, and completely unimpressed by my presence. You must be Lucia, she said, extending a hand that felt cold and limp when I shook it. I'm Margaret. We've heard so much about you. The emphasis on so much made it clear that not all of it had been positive. It's wonderful to finally meet you, I replied, trying to match her polite smile. Thank you for hosting this beautiful celebration. Well, nothing is too good for Carolina and the baby, Margaret responded, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I was suddenly hyper-aware of my modest dress, the nicest one I owned, but clearly not nice enough for this crowd. I see you brought a gift. How thoughtful. The way she said thoughtful made it sound like an insult. I clutched my present tighter, suddenly feeling foolish about what was inside. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't from a registry, but it was meaningful. At least, I thought it was. Mom, let me introduce you to some of the other guests, Carolina said quickly, clearly wanting to move away from this awkward encounter. She led me toward a group of women who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Their laughter was musical, their conversation peppered with reference to vacation homes and charity galas. Everyone, this is my mother Lucia, Carolina announced. The group turned toward me with synchronized smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Oh, you're the seamstress, one of them exclaimed, as if I were some exotic creature. How fascinating. I've always wondered what it would be like to work with your hands, work with my hands, as if manual labor was some quaint hobby rather than the back-breaking work that had put food on our table and paid for Carolina's education. I felt my face flush, but I kept my smile in place. Yes, I've been sewing for most of my life, I replied. It's how I supported Carolina through school. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. I could practically hear their thoughts. How awkward. How common. Well, that's certainly admirable, another woman said, her tone dripping with condescension. It must be such a relief to see Carolina married to someone who can provide for her properly now. The words hit me like a physical blow. Provide for her properly, as if everything I'd given Carolina, my love, my sacrifices, my sleepless nights working overtime to pay for her books and clothes, had been inadequate, improper. I watched Carolina's face, hoping to see some defense of me, some acknowledgement of what I'd done for her. Instead, I saw embarrassment. She was embarrassed by me, by my life, by the fact that I'd raised her without wealth, without connections, without the kind of privilege that surrounded us now. Excuse me, I murmured, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. I'll just find the restroom. I made my way through the crowd, past women discussing their children's private schools and summer camp, past conversations about stock portfolios and European vacation, I found myself in a hallway lined with family portraits. Margareth's family, with their perfect smiles and expensive clothes. There wasn't a single photo of Carolina's childhood, of the life we'd built together. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked small and tired. The fluorescent lights were harsh, highlighting every wrinkle, every gray hair I couldn't afford to color at a salon. My dress, which I'd thought looked nice when I'd put it on this morning, now seemed shabby and outdated. I thought about leaving, just walking out, calling a taxi, and going home to my small house with its familiar smells and comfortable furniture. But this was my daughter's day, my first grandchild. I couldn't abandon her, even if she seemed to want me to. When I returned to the party, I tried to find a quiet corner where I could blend into the background. But as I stood there, nursing a cup of tea and watching Carolina laugh with her new friends, I heard something that made my blood run cold. "She seems sweet enough," one of the women was saying, in a voice just loud enough for me to hear. "But honestly, she's so out of place here. It's like she's from a different world." "Poor Carolina," another replied. "It must be so embarrassing. I mean, what do you even talk about with someone like that?" "Don't worry," came a third voice, and I recognized it as Margareth. "She's irrelevant now. Carolina has us. She has a real family to support her." Irrelevant. The word echoed in my mind like a gunshot. Irrelevant. After 28 years of being Carolina's whole world, after sacrificing everything for her dream, after loving her unconditionally through every triumph and heartbreak, I was irrelevant. I set down my teacup with shaking hands and looked around the room with new eyes. This wasn't just a baby shower. This was a replacement ceremony. They were systematically erasing me from Carolina's life, replacing my love with their money, my history, with their status. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. They didn't know that this irrelevant woman had a gift that would change everything. I retreated to the furthest corner of the massive living room, my back against the wall, watching the celebration unfold like a movie I wasn't supposed to be in. The gift table was overflowing with elaborate presents, silver rattle, designer baby clothes, a stroller that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Each gift came with squeals of delight and effusive thanks, while I remained invisible, holding my own modest offering. The conversation swirled around me like a foreign language. These women spoke of things I'd never experienced: ski trips to Aspen, shopping sprees in Paris, nannies and boarding school. They lived in a world where problems were solved with credit cards and connections, where love was measured in dollar signs and social status. I watched Carolina move through the crowd like a swan, graceful and radiant. She'd always been beautiful, but now she carried herself differently. Her posture was straighter, her laugh more refined. She'd learned to fit into this world in ways I never could, and maybe that was for the best. Maybe I'd raised her to soar beyond the limits of my own small life. But watching her now, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Where was the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorm? Where was the teenager who'd cry on my shoulder after her first heartbreak? Where was the young woman who'd hugged me so tight when she got her college acceptance letter, tears streaming down both our faces? "Lucia," a soft voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a woman about my age, with kind eyes and calloused hands that reminded me of my own. "I'm Rosa, the housekeeper. I've been working here for 15 years. I felt a surge of relief at finding someone who might understand my world. "Hello, Rosa. It's nice to meet you. I wanted to tell you," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "that Carolina talks about you all the time. She's so proud of how hard you work to give her opportunity. She may not show it today, but she loves you deeply." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only made the ache in my chest worse. If Carolina loved me, why was she treating me like an unwelcome guest at her own celebration? Why was she allowing these women to dismiss me so cruelly? "Thank you," I whispered, not trusting my voice to be steady. Rosa squeezed my hand briefly before disappearing back into the kitchen. I was alone again, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. The gift opening ceremony began, and I watched as Carolina unwrapped present after present: a cashmere baby blanket, a gold-plated picture frame, a designer baby carrier. Each gift was met with the appropriate level of enthusiasm, photographed for social media, and carefully arranged for display. Margareth stood beside Carolina like a queen, overseeing her court, making comments about each gift and its giver. Oh, how thoughtful of the Johnson. What exquisite taste Miranda has. This will go perfectly in the nursery. I noticed that my gift remained unopened in the pile, seemingly forgotten, or perhaps deliberately saved for last. The knot in my stomach tightened as I realized that whatever was inside my carefully wrapped box would pale in comparison to the luxury surrounding it. "Carolina, sweetheart," Margaret announced. "I think it's time for my gift." The room fell silent as she produced an envelope from her purse. Inside was a deed to a house, not just any house, but a mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The crowd gasped and applauded as Carolina's eyes filled with tears. "Margaret, I can't accept this," Carolina said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Nonsense," Margaret replied. "You're family now. This is what family does for each other. We take care of our own. We take care of our own." The message was clear. I wasn't family. I was just someone who'd served her purpose and was now being discarded. As the applause died down, Carolina's eyes met mine across the room. For a moment, I saw something there. Guilt, perhaps, or recognition of what this moment meant. But then she looked away, and I knew she'd made her choice. "I think there's one more gift," someone called out, pointing to my lonely package on the table. "Oh yes," Carolina said, her voice lacking the enthusiasm she'd shown for the other presents. "This is from my mother." The room's attention turned to me, and I felt every eye boring into my soul. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the expensive wallpaper, and never face the humiliation of having my modest gift judged by these people who had everything. Carolina picked up my present with careful politeness, the same way she might handle something fragile or potentially dangerous. The wrapping paper I'd chosen, cheerful yellow with tiny ducks, suddenly looked childish and cheap compared to the elegant packaging of the other gifts. "What could it be?" someone whispered, and I heard the barely concealed mockery in their voice. As Carolina began to unwrap my gift, I thought about what was inside. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't from a registry. It couldn't be displayed in a designer nursery or posted on social media. But it was the most precious thing I owned, and I'd given it willingly, lovingly, believing it would mean something to my daughter. I'd been wrong about so many things today. Wrong about being welcome. Wrong about being valued. Wrong about my place in Carolina's new life. But I hadn't been wrong about the gift. Inside that box was something that would change everything. Something that would remind everyone in this room, including my daughter, that love isn't measured in dollars or social status. It's measured in sacrifice, in presence, in the small moments that create a lifetime of memory. Carolina lifted the lid, and I held my breath. This was it, the moment of truth, the moment when I'd either be vindicated or utterly humiliated. The room fell silent as Carolina stared into the box. Her face went pale, and her hands began to tremble. She reached inside and pulled out a small, worn diary, my diary from the year she was born. But that wasn't all. Beneath the diary were photographs, hundreds of them, pictures of Carolina's first step, her first words, her first day of school, pictures of birthday parties I'd thrown with homemade decorations and grocery store cakes, pictures of Halloween costumes I'd sewn by hand, of Christmas mornings around our small tree, of bedtime stories read by lamplight. And there, at the very bottom, was a letter I'd written to Carolina on the day she was born, when I'd held her for the first time and promised to love her forever, no matter what. Carolina's hands shook as she unfolded the letter and began to read. The room remained silent, but I could see the other women craning their necks, trying to understand what was happening. Why had their sophisticated, poised hostess suddenly become a crying mess over a box of old photographs? I watched my daughter's face transform as she read my words from 28 years ago. Words of love, of hope, of dreams I'd had for her future. Words that reminded her of who she was before she became who she thought she needed to be. This was my gift. Not just the physical items in the box, but the memories they represented. The proof that she'd been loved completely, unconditionally, from the very first moment of her life. The evidence that her childhood hadn't been lacking. It had been rich with the only thing that really mattered. And suddenly, I wasn't irrelevant anymore. Carolina's tears fell silently onto the letter as she read my words from nearly 3 decades ago. The room had gone completely still, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I watched my daughter's face cycle through emotion, recognition, shame, and finally, something I hadn't seen in her eyes all day. Pure, unfiltered love. "My dearest Carolina," she began reading aloud, her voice trembling. "Today you came into this world, and I've never felt love like this before. I may not have much money, and I may not be able to give you everything you want, but I promise you this. I will love you with every breath in my body. I will work my fingers to the bone to make sure you have opportunities I never had. I will be your biggest cheerleader, your softest place to fall, and your strongest advocate. You are my miracle, my heart walking around outside my body, and I will spend every day proving that you are worthy of all the love in the world. Her voice broke completely on the last word, and the silence in the room was deafening. I could see the other women exchanging glances, their carefully constructed composure beginning to crack as they realized they were witnessing something profound and private. Carolina set the letter down with shaking hands and picked up one of the photographs. It was from her 5th birthday party, a picture of her wearing a homemade princess dress I'd spent weeks sewing, her face covered in chocolate cake, beaming with pure joy. Behind her, our tiny apartment looked shabby and small, but it was filled with love. I remember this dress, she whispered, holding the photo up to the light. I thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. I wore it for months, even to bed sometimes. She picked up another photo, Carolina's high school graduation. In it, I was hugging her tight, both of us crying with pride and relief. I was wearing the same dress I'd worn to every important event in her life because it was the only nice dress I owned. But in that moment, captured forever in that photograph, I looked like the richest woman in the world. You were there for everything, Carolina continued, her voice getting stronger. Every scraped knee, every nightmare, every triumph, every disappointment. You never missed a school play, a parent-teacher conference, a soccer game. Even when you were working double shifts, even when you could barely keep your eyes open, you were there. I felt tears streaming down my own cheeks now, but I remained in my corner, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell was happening. Margaret cleared her throat uncomfortably. Carolina, dear, perhaps we should. No, Carolina said firmly, looking directly at her mother-in-law. You need to hear this. You all need to hear this. She stood up, still clutching the photographs, and faced the room full of designer-dressed women who had spent the afternoon treating me like an unwelcome intruder. My mother raised me alone, Carolina announced, her voice carrying across the silent room. She worked 16-hour days in factories and sweatshops to pay for my education. She never bought herself anything new because every penny went toward my future. She taught me to be strong, to be independent, to never give up on my dream. She picked up another photograph, this one of us studying together at our kitchen table. I was helping her with homework, while dinner cooked on the stove, both of us surrounded by textbooks and papers. It was such an ordinary moment, but seeing it now, I realized how extraordinary it had been. She taught me that love isn't about what you can buy, Carolina continued. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. It's about showing up day after day, even when you're exhausted and overwhelmed and scared. It's about believing in someone so completely that you'd give up your own dreams to make theirs come true. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I watched as some of the women began to shift uncomfortably, perhaps thinking about their own relationships with their children, their own definitions of love and sacrifice. And today, Carolina said, her voice breaking again, today I almost let you make me forget that. I almost let you convince me that she was irrelevant. She looked directly at Margaret when she said this, and I saw the older woman's face flush with shame. But she's not irrelevant, Carolina continued. She's the most important person in my life. She's the reason I became someone worth loving. She's the reason I'm strong enough to be a mother myself. Carolina walked across the room then, past all the expensive gifts, past all the judgmental faces, straight to me. She knelt down beside my chair and took my hands in hers. I'm sorry, Mama, she whispered, using the name she hadn't called me in years. I'm so sorry. I lost myself in all of this, but you reminded me who I really am. I pulled her into my arms then, holding her as I had when she was small and scared and needed comfort. She cried against my shoulder, and I felt 28 years of love and worry and pride washing over me like a wave. I'm proud of you, I whispered into her hair. I'm proud of the woman you've become, the life you've built, the family you're creating. You don't need to choose between your old life and your new one. They're both part of who you are. When we finally pulled apart, I saw that several of the other women were crying too. Margaret stood apart from the group, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. I could see her struggling with the realization that she'd been wrong about me, about what I meant to Carolina. I owe you an apology, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I judged you unfairly. I didn't understand. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting for so long. "You don't owe me anything," I said quietly. "But you owe Carolina the respect of accepting all of her, including where she came from." Margaret nodded, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Respect. Not the grudging acknowledgement of someone who'd been caught in wrong behavior, but genuine respect for a woman who'd accomplished something she was only beginning to understand. The rest of the afternoon passed in a different atmosphere, entirely. The other women approached me with genuine curiosity about my life, my work, my experiences raising Carolina. They asked about the photographs, about the stories behind them, about what it had been like to be a single mother in a world that didn't always support women like me. I found myself relaxing, sharing stories I hadn't told in years. I talked about the time Carolina had insisted on wearing her Halloween costume to the grocery store in July, about the science fair project that had taken over our entire apartment, about the day she'd gotten her first job and insisted on taking me out to dinner with her first paycheck. These weren't stories about overcoming poverty or struggling against the odds. They were stories about love in its purest form, the kind that doesn't need expensive gifts or perfect circumstances to flourish. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, Carolina sat beside me, still holding some of the photographs. "I want to frame these," she said. "I want to put them in the nursery so the baby will know about the grandmother who loved his mother enough to sacrifice everything for her. And I want to hear more stories," she continued. "I want to remember all the things I've forgotten, all the moments I took for granted. Will you help me?" I squeezed her hand. "Of course, minha filha. I have a lifetime of stories to tell." When it was time to leave, Carolina walked me to the door. "Will you come to dinner next week?" she asked. "Just you and me and Ricardo. I want to start over. I want to do better." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw both the sophisticated woman she'd become and the little girl she'd always be to me. "I'd love that," I said. As my taxi pulled away from the mansion, I looked back to see Carolina standing in the doorway, still holding my photographs. She waved, and I waved back, knowing that something fundamental had shifted between us. They had called me irrelevant. They had dismissed me as a relic of a past Carolina was better off without. But in the end, my gift had reminded everyone in that room of something they'd forgotten, that love isn't about what you can provide materially. It's about what you're willing to give of yourself. I had given Carolina everything I had, and in return, she had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to be her mother, to shape her into the incredible woman she'd become, and to love her unconditionally through every stage of her life. That night, as I sat in my small house looking through the duplicate photographs I'd kept for myself, I realized that I wasn't irrelevant at all. I was essential. I was the foundation upon which Carolina had built her life, the root system that had allowed her to grow and flourish. And tomorrow, I would start planning for my grandchild, not with expensive gifts or elaborate plans, but with the same thing I'd always given Carolina, my whole heart, my complete presence, and my unwavering love. Because that's what mothers do. We show up. We love without condition. We sacrifice without expecting recognition. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to see our children remember who they are and where they came from. Sometimes, love wins.